last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dark Matters Radio here on the KGRA digital broadcast station. Yes, Don Ecker is here. He's standing by, but tonight we're going to do a little change of pace. And along with me here is Marc Dantonio. What's going on, Marc?
Along came a spider. Hey, how you doing, Bill?
Doing
What's
great.
going on?
Great. I think, Marc, tonight we're going to do something different on Dark Matters Radio. We're going to interview Don Ecker.
No way. Wait, what's so interesting about Don Ecker?
Oh, I hope a lot, because we're going to have 2 hours to talk to him about his past and everything he's accomplished and some of the things he may not have accomplished that we're going to confront him on.
Ooh, in all likelihood, though, Bill, that won't be enough time.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Don Ecker, I mean, I've known about Don Ecker for decades.
Yeah,
okay? And heard
this might
about
have to
him
be a series.
years and years ago. Okay, when I first started investigating UFOs and researching UFOs, Don Ecker's name would come up a lot, and I go, "Who is this guy, Don Ecker? Don Ecker, Don Ecker?" And then I looked up, information about him. I heard from people about him, and it's like, well, maybe someday I'll get to meet the guy. And wouldn't you know it, someday I got to meet the guy. And, I know you want me to say, and I wasn't impressed, but I actually was very impressed. He has an incredible past, and he has an incredible wealth of talent. And then he has, I guess, the lack of mental fortitude to have me on his show sometimes. So I don't know what happened there, but it's okay. I mean, because I enjoy coming on the show, even though he's probably not thinking clearly by having me on the show. You see what I mean? Uh-huh. I don't see how I help him, but hey, it's okay. The man is a legend, really.
Totally agree. I mean, if you look at just part of his resume, he was the director of research and media liaison for UFO magazine for many years. He's a former law enforcement officer and criminal investigator with over 10 years of experience there. Of course, we know that Don served time in the Army in Vietnam. I mean, he's done quite a bit in his life. He was on a SWAT team, and I think that's where, and we're going to ask him about this, I think Don Ecker was actually wounded, which led to his retirement when he had an incident. I believe it was in 1986. So, but before we get to Don, you've been covering a lot of the Neowise Comet this week. So how's that been going?
Correct. Well, in SkyTour Livestream, we've been opening the observatory every clear night and looking at the comet. We've had 2 amazing nights where we would actually be able to see the comet. We saw it beautifully. I took many photos, making them available to people, made lots of posts across Facebook and other social media to show them the comet. It's just a beautiful comet of the century, in fact. In a way to put it. And one of the things that I've discovered is that people really, really, really love science. Mm-hmm. And it draws other people out of the woodwork, too. People, I have people saying, well, the comets are being controlled by extraterrestrial races, blah, 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 but, that stuff, basically, it ends up as a Facebook post, and I write, wow, that's interesting, but not today. Thank you for playing. So there's people that make those claims, but unfortunately they're not true, in my view. It's a gorgeous comet. And, when people look at it, they can see it in detail, and we show them to them. And we also added another camera, another system to the observatory. So now we can literally switch between a wide-angle view and the close-up telescopic view and show them the both views, like one after the other. So it's really, really pretty, man.
Well, tonight is July 24th. How many more possible days, or actually evenings, Mark, do people have the opportunity to go out there and view the comet?
Well, with their binoculars, they can look at it probably into August. But the comet is going to rapidly, get dimmer as it gets a little farther away. Don't forget, the reason you see the comet at all is because some of its mass is being ejected into space, by the interactions with the sun's energy. And so the comet is going to basically evaporate over time, just not this time around. But don't worry, it'll be back again. You just have to wait, 6,800 years for it to come back.
Yeah,
what?
Quite some time.
Is that a long time?
Yeah, I think so.
Astronomical terms, it's a quick jump. But in human years, of course, that's, obviously centuries.
So if the weather is cooperative for the weekend, will you be streaming on Sky Tour Livestream, covering it?
Absolutely. Up on YouTube, Sky Tour Livestream is going to stream the comet every chance it can. So it's really, really cool. Comets are, the original, some of the original inhabitants of the solar system, right? I mean, they were formed way back in the beginning, just after the sun formed. And they have been circling in their same form pretty much for billions of years. But the ones that actually make it into the middle of the solar system, the center where the sun is, they may orbit the sun and then leave the solar system. They may orbit the sun in an ongoing elliptical orbit, or they might, orbit the sun in a way that takes them getting whipped out of the solar system from that orbit. I mean, all three things have happened, and they're different types of orbits. But, that doesn't matter. What really matters is that they all come from the outer regions of the solar system, the place called the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud. All right, and the Kuiper Belt are those icy bodies out past Neptune. It's a further disk of material. Then there's a disk called the Oort disk out beyond that, which is full of icy bodies as well. And then around the whole solar system in a spherical cloud is the Oort cloud. And that Oort cloud is where some of these high inclination comets, that is the comets that come down at a steep angle to the solar system, come in from. So it's pretty cool.
What area of the sky should folks be looking toward to view the comet, Mark?
Well, if you want to look for the comet, what you do is you wait for sunset, and you see where the sun set, and then you look to the right of that, toward the northwest. And then once it gets dark enough to see the Big Dipper in the sky, and it'll be in such a way that it'll look like the Dipper is pouring, kind of on edge, pouring out. You look under the Big Dipper in that region, and you'll see a fuzzy object, probably with binoculars. And that fuzzy object is Comet Neowise. And by the way, Neowise, Neowise, is a space telescope. That's the name of the space telescope. So this particular comet, I think, is designated F3, okay, but it's actually it's C2020, like F3 or something, and the F3 is just a designation for what it is. But it was found by the Neowise instrument, which started life as the WISE telescope, the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. Okay, that was WISE, and then they repurposed it, made it have an additional mission to find other things in our solar system, including comets, and they called it the NEO WISE, or the Near Earth Object WISE. So that's where the name comes from.
Got it. Well, I think, folks, you can go to Sky Tour Livestream. You check it out tonight. Mark may be streaming also this weekend, and always check out Sky Tour Livestream. And, of course, Sky Tour Radio, which airs here on KGRA, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It is a 2-hour show on Sundays with co-hosts Amanda Curran and Daryl Mason.
It's a great show. I enjoy it.
So do I. And especially as your producer. So here we go. We've got the man of the hour standing by. This will be a pretty interesting switch up on him. And before we begin, Mark, I am not going to sing. There's just no way it's going to happen.
Not going to ask.
You know where I'm going. But it is Don Ecker's birthday on Sunday, I believe. So we want to wish Don Ecker a happy birthday. All right. So we're going to welcome right now Don Ecker to the show, his show. And how you doing, Don?
Hey, Bill. Hey, Mark. Doing well. A lot of people may be wondering why we are doing this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if I may be so bold, we had a guest scheduled last Friday, out of the country. He's down in South America. At the last minute, he had to cancel because he was on a business trip. So we rescheduled for tonight. And once again, he is unavailable. So rather than doing a best of show, I told Bill, I said, Bill, let's do a toss-up. Let's do an interview of moi and you, and maybe if you can get a hold of Marc Dantonio, maybe you guys can interview me. It might be fun. So anyway, that's how we ended up here.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's great. And honestly, Don, I'm honored that you would choose to have me when your guest bails.
Well, here we are, buddy.
No, it's fine. It's fine. And I know Bill's got a bunch of questions for you as well. But I look for, your guest will be interesting when he comes on, because he actually has contacted me as well to do some analysis of photos he's taken.
Well, I may invite him back sometime next year. We'll see.
Okay, well.
Maybe.
All right.
2 weeks in a row. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I get it, and I know enough not to question you because you are the man.
Exactly.
Exactly, right, Bill?
I totally agree. I mean, with all the people that have been doing this out there for over the years, Mark, the first person, obviously, that I think of, and I think many of us think of, is Art Bell as pioneers. Oh, yeah. But Don Ecker's right up there. He's also a pioneer. He's been involved with this for so long. I don't want to say too long because I'll make him feel old. So I'm not going to go there. But actually, Don, let's go. Let's start at the beginning. When did you become interested in ufology? When did this start for you?
This is good. I want to hear this part.
Well, actually,
my popcorn. So go ahead.
Back in the early 60s, in school, we had a book club in school where you could order books through this book club. A lot of stuff like, let me think of Frank Edwards books, Stranger Than Science, Strangest of All, a number of books like that where he would have vignettes in there of true and extremely odd things that happened. And a lot of those included UFOs. Now, in 1966, in December, but I'm originally from the East Coast. I think everybody knows that. Originally from Pennsylvania, from the central western part. And it was, back in those days, the hunting season, which coincided with the football season. And I played a lot of football. I played in high school and, what have you. But in October, I think it was, small game season opened, and that was always a very big time, but the huge time was deer season. And it was the very first day of deer season, and I'm going by my memory, it might have been like December the 11th. I really don't quite remember anymore, but I was with 3 other buddies. We were all in high school together. And coming down off a hill, we were getting ready to go home in the afternoon, and we were overflown by 4 unidentified flying objects in a diamond formation. And that was my first genuine acceptance of the fact that, yeah, this thing is really real. And it put me on a really off and on a lifetime pursuit, especially after I medically retired.
Today, looking back at that incident that happened in '66, are you still convinced that what you've seen was something unidentified, like a UAP. I don't really like to use the acronym UFO. I think UAP is more appropriate now. Do you still, to this day, believe that to be the case? That this was...
Oh, my glory, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because these 4 objects, whatever they were, when they overflew us, they were like brilliant arc lights. And over the years, when I've told this story, I mentioned that I pretty much believe they were somewhere between 12, perhaps 15,000 feet up in the sky. They were flying relatively a slow speed, maybe a couple of 100 miles an hour, when suddenly the light in the rear of the diamond shot straight up into the sky, just like a rocket, like an Atlas rocket taking off. And it was literally gone in a couple of seconds, out of sight. And then the other 3, like somebody kicked them in the rear end, they hit a burst of speed, and they were gone within 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, it was astounding. So absolutely they were unidentified, and they seemed to be under intelligent control. So whatever they were, I'm positive they were not something from the United States military.
Interesting.
Can I ask you something about it?
Sure.
Can I, my first thought was, what have I seen that looks like that? Because I'm trying to figure out, for the folks listening, I'm trying to put it into perspective for what could it have been. And when we try to figure these things out, most people know I'm like the chief photo and video analyst for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And what does it mean? It means I'm willing to do the job. It's a great opportunity and exceptional people. Now, as far as when you see something like this, the first thing I do is I try to consider, was this an ordinary object or ordinary objects seen in an extraordinary manner? Because that typically can happen, and many times will. But it's that small percentage, like cases like yours, Don, which of course might very well be the linchpins to something greater. And so in an effort to get to that something greater, I want to just get some detail on that, if I may. The diamond formation of lights, you said the rear one shot up into the sky. Now, were they already going over your head at that point?
Yeah.
How do you know it was going up further? In other words,
how do I know? Because I observed it. I watched it.
Okay, but if it's going up it's over your head somewhere, right? How do you know it's going up higher in the sky? Because it's going away from you, right? So is there a way for you to figure out that it was going away from you? I mean, did it just get smaller or something? How did it actually appear to you?
It shot up into the sky. Mark, I used to jump out of airplanes.
Of course you did.
In the Army, and I know, believe me, I know up and down. Okay, so from my point of observation, this thing suddenly, with no warning, shot up into the sky, and within a couple of seconds, at most, it disappeared. Okay, it was a bright light, and then suddenly, within a second or two, it was gone. And it was gone when I saw it climbing. And like I said, it was like a rocket lifting off. Not initially, because a rocket initially, when it starts to lift off, is seemingly going slow. Right. And then suddenly it's going faster and faster and faster. Well, this thing just went fast. Okay. It forewent the slow process.
Yeah, I gotcha. The moment of inertia didn't seem to have a moment of inertia where it has to, overcome the retarding of movement based on its own mass. Basically, it just went and it was gone.
Right.
It was almost like it had no mass or something. Now, and then the other lights shortly thereafter accelerated away.
Yeah.
And that's how
they were traveling. Let me see. They were traveling east in an eastward direction. The whole four lights originally were traveling east when the one in the rear went up into the sky and disappeared. Okay. And then suddenly the three lights, now in a V formation, still traveling east, suddenly hit a burst of speed simultaneously, I might add, all of them together in tandem. And they were gone within just a very few seconds, and they were gone.
So did they accelerate horizontally toward the western horizon? No, toward the eastern horizon, or did they accelerate upward the same way the other ones did?
No, they kept going horizontally.
All right, so they accelerated horizontally.
Later, many years later, in the 80s, when I was making a decision to I was making a decision if I wished to pursue this UFO back in those days it was UFO, Bill. It was not UAP.
I understand that.
But I was making a decision on whether or not this was something I wanted to continue on with. I did a very intensive 6-month study where I literally immersed myself into the topic. I haunted libraries. I haunted bookstores. I got phone numbers and I called people. And I just did a very intense. And one of the people that I met and became friends with, well, as much as you could be with the guy, because he was somewhat irascible, was John Keel, okay, who at that time was living in New York. And his book, The Mothman Prophecies, was one I had ordered when I first came across the title in the very early 70s, after I was back from the Army. His book was being announced in Fate magazine, where I saw it. So I went down to a local bookstore and I put an order in for it. And as soon as it came in, I picked it up. I immediately took it home and I just read that thing actually a couple of times. And then I started to make endeavors to contact Keel, because the biggest part of that book that basically he was talking about was the West Virginia apparently cryptid creature that was being observed by many people down there, which had an inordinate interest in blood. I'm sure you guys both read The Mothman Prophecies.
Yeah, familiar with it.
At one point or another. Mm-hmm. And then the Silver Bridge collapse that happened over the Ohio River. So all that happened in my part of the country. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was only a couple of hours from my hometown. So all this stuff, as I discovered during my historical retrospective, there was a tremendous flap, a UFO flap, that encompassed basically the eastern seaboard. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. That entire area was being just absolutely, the skies were invaded by something. And I also discovered, and you got to remember, at that time, there were basically no news reports of any of that carried by television,
mainstream
radio,
media.
or the newspapers.
Yep.
Nobody talked about it. It was persona non grata. So that just fascinated me to no end. Now, one other thing I've got to mention. When I first came back from Vietnam, that was in 1972, after I was wounded, and I was in the hospital for not quite 6 months, and I discharged, came home, and in early 1974, is when I first became a police officer. And my department, which was in Antis Township in Pennsylvania, I discovered something that MUFON had investigated, where a police officer's wife had literally, in a country road between my hometown and going down into Antis Township, had literally been run off the road by an unidentified object, and she crashed her car. Now, that was something that nobody talked about, especially with the UFO element to it.
Oh,
so
for sure.
I was fascinated. And my department, incidentally, had an 800 number. Never used it, okay, but it was to report UFO sightings. And of course, when I saw that, I was just basically flabbergasted. And I was not aware at that time, and we're talking 1974, that there were as many sightings as people were seeing. Now, look at it this way, and it's the same thing today. If you see something weird in the sky, who are you going to call? Because during that period of time, the United States military had publicly totally washed its hands of it. You could call your local police department, but let's get real. What are they going to do about it? Okay? There's not a heck of a lot you could do. So, as far as witnesses went in the public, they were between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, for sure.
And it makes me wonder, when you brought up MUFON, because I also know as a criminal investigator, it was one of the biggest cases, I think, and mysteries that you investigated. I believe it started in the early 80s, and others have dabbled into the area, but you were taking it to a whole new level, which was actually something that made me think of the hostile possibilities involving some of these instances or alleged abduction cases, and that's the cattle mutilations that you were investigating, Don. And you took a different spin.
Which turned into human
exactly.
Case.
And it connects to MUFON because you were going to do a presentation on this. So can you just go further into that a little bit, how you began on the investigation of the cattle mutilations and how it manifested into something else?
Oh, yeah, sure. In 1981, my department, and I was working for the state in Idaho, okay, it was right following Halloween, 81. A farmer, called the department because roughly 35 yards or so from his back door, and this guy was married, had a couple of kids, had several dogs, of course, and that goes without saying. And he woke up in the morning, went out to his kitchen, looked out the back door. A cow that had been fine the day before was lying out there dead, just lying roughly 35 yards or so from his house. So he went out and he checked it, and it had been mutilated. Now, at that time, 81, mutilations were quite a big story. And they were happening. What a lot of people don't realize is how far-ranging this went. States of Colorado, Montana, Nevada, Washington State, and as far back east as animal mutilations in my state of Pennsylvania were happening. Now, right around Halloween, as you can expect, the armchair researchers, it must be devil worship or something, some crazy kids are out there doing this and doing that. But I got the call and I went out and I examined the crime scene. The animal, of course, was still there. And make a long story short, other than the rancher walking out there, the area was pristine. And when I say pristine, there was no evidence anybody was around there. There were no tire tracks. There were no footprints other than the rancher. There were no things like cigarette butts, gum wrappers, nothing like that. But yet the animal was lying there dead. Its rectum had been cored out. An ear was missing. An eyeball had been incised and removed. But the strangest thing that just flabbergasted me was the lack of blood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was totally exsanguinated. So,
Exsanguinated, Bill. Exsanguinated. Remember that word, okay?
I'm sorry?
No, exsanguinated. That's a good word.
Yeah, well, I used it for your benefit, Mark. I wasn't aware if you were, if you were aware of what that was. It means there's no blood. The blood was all removed. So.
I do know that, yes. Yeah.
So if you're from Rio Linda,
Here we go.
But anyway, that animal was not the only one that had been killed that night. Over the hill from this guy was another farmer who also had a dead cow. Now, the upshot was the case was never solved. And I am positive that in my chain of command, somebody on up the chain was very familiar with this. I had heard of it, but I had never been exposed to it before. And I'm talking about animal mutilations. At that time, I did not have very much information about it at all. And so I was fascinated, but they basically ended up wanting to shovel this under the rug. That was the upshot, because it was never solved. As a matter of fact, when I became very invested in this whole area of research, I discovered at that point, and I'm talking about the very late 80s, the very early 90s, no one had ever been arrested or prosecuted anywhere for this crime. And it was basically an agricultural crime. But cattle were not the only animals that suffered this fate. There were many other animals. Horses, for example, although not as many, nearly as many as what cattle were basically suffering. Now, as I began to meet and get to know people, one guy I collaborated with back in those days was Kevin Randall. Now, at that time, Randall was still a captain in the reserves, active reserves. He, as a matter of fact, when the Iraqi conflict flared up in 2003 and 4, his unit was activated and he went over there. He was a pilot and also an intelligence officer in the Air Force, then the Army. Now, or I'm sorry, the Army and then the Air Force. In Vietnam, he was a Vietnam veteran, had been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, in the United States Army, and then later became an officer in the Air National Guard. Now, the bottom line was I had a number of conversations with Kevin Randall. And one of the things I discovered when I was really up to my eyebrows in this were how the ranchers and farmers were reacting to this. And to say they were not taking it well would be an understatement. These guys had a heck of a lot of money invested into their animals, their herds, and anytime they had an animal that ended up mutilated, they were losing a heck of a lot of money. So these guys were out wandering around their ranch lands armed to the teeth. Now, over the years, there had been stories floated like, well, I think this is really a covert secret military operation. They're probably checking, conditions of the ground. They're checking for radiation, this type of thing. They're using black helicopters to fly in there, check these herds, occasionally mutilate one, take the blood, et cetera, all this nonsense. Well,
they even did a movie about that called Endangered Species, remember?
Oh, yeah, about 40 years ago. Well,
it was on that premise that it was really the mutilated cattle were just a government operation.
Yeah. Well, let me give you my attitude on that. Horse pucky, okay? Horse pucky, because it couldn't have happened without one or more ranchers encountering that. And then there would have been bodies out there on the plains. Because Randall told me, and I forget now how many years ago it was. I'm pretty sure it was still in the 80s or the 90s. He was flying a helicopter from point A to point B for the Air Guard. And they were overflying some ranch lands. Now, remember, he was a combat veteran of Vietnam. Yeah. Suddenly, pa-doom, 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 somebody was shooting at his bird. And this was at night. And he recognized what had happened, and he immediately took evasive maneuvers. But there were people out there thinking that this might be one of those black helicopters.
Sure.
Overflying their property looking for a cow or whatever. And they started shooting first. So, this actually can be traced back, this phenomena, to at least the 50s, the 1950s. And of course, everybody will or should recall the famous 1967 case of Snippy the horse, which was a mutilation. There were people that were well aware that something very odd was going on. And like I said, they were armed to the teeth, and they wouldn't have stood for it. So, take it for what it's worth.
I mean, I don't actually have an opinion either way. As far as I'm concerned, it could have been an extraterrestrial incursion. It could have been a black project. I don't see proof of each. I don't see convincing.
Let me tell you what John Keel's thought about it.
All right.
After I read his book, now, like I said, I became friends with Keel. I knew Keel. As a matter of fact, before the movie with Richard, the Mothman Prophecy movie, Richard
Gere.
Gere, thank you. Richard Gere. Before that came out, back in the very, very early 90s, was right after Richard Saraday and I teamed up. And Richard Saraday was looking for a project. So I was kind of mentoring Rich into the overall field. And I would give him books to go home and read, which I considered at that time to be very important works. People like Jacques Vallée, any number of his books, people like Tor Dahleen, which happens to be his real name, wrote a seminal book called The Gods of Eden, and of course John Keel and the Mothman Prophecies. So after Saraday read the Mothman Prophecies, he came back and he said, do you know John Keel? And I said, yeah. So he said, would you call him up and I'd like to talk to him to see about the possibility of optioning his book for a film project. So I said, okay. And I did that, and Richard talked to John Keel. And Keel basically, at least at that point, could have cared less. Now, that was the thing that was odd about John. He could be a real curmudgeon, all right? And on the other hand, he could be a very funny, very gracious guy. But when Faraday was talking to him about the possibility of putting money in his pocket, and let's face it, Keel, for all the years of work and research and traveling and all the things John Keel did, seemed like he could not have cared less. So I found that very unusual. But there were people at that point who were, well, I guess in some respects like people today, but that were totally freaked out about that. So I'm talking to John one day, and he had some ideas about things in the field that I kind of clashed with him about. Now, in full disclosure, back in those days, I was absolutely, totally convinced we were dealing with a nuts and bolts phenomena. And I gave very short shrift to any other possibility. Now, my thinking since then has changed dramatically. So I'm talking to Keel because he was very up on the whole blood loss, the mutilation thing, etc. And if you don't believe me, read his book, The Mothman Prophecies. So I said, John, what in the world, how do you explain what this might be? And he said, and, in those days I thought, well, quite frankly, I thought, oh, man, this guy has lost it. But he was working with the supposition that these things, which he called ultra-terrestrial, which you and I would probably refer to as interdimensional, not ultra-terrestrial, but interdimensional, coming from another dimension right here, but in another plane of existence entirely, separated by whatever the hell it is that would separate it. They were coming here, he thought, or theorized, and they were taking these animals and utilizing flesh and blood to create creatures that worked in this environment, i.e., the Men in Black. Now, for anybody that's ever done any research on the Men in Black, you know how odd and unusual and, quite frankly, freaky, scary these things, these individuals, entities, whatever they are, have been described as. Well, Keel was working with the possibility that they were actually manufactured by intelligences from somewhere else using animal blood and flesh. Now, I just mentioned that in passing, but I always found that, well, even then, quite freaky.
Well, then what would be the connection, if possible, to human abductions and the human mutilations angle? Because I think in 1989, Don, this all came to a climactic point. I believe it was in Las Vegas when you were doing this MUFON conference, and you were going to do a presentation on, I think it was human mutilations. You can correct me if I'm wrong, and it all kind of went batshit crazy, just to be honest.
Well, yeah, it did. And if you're going to bring that up, I got to bring something up. John Lear, starting around 1986, entered the fray, the whole UFO fray. Now, I got to know Lear pretty damned well. And these days, and I'll be, you know me, guys, I don't pull punches.
You're probably going to say similar things to me, and I don't want to second guess what you're going to say, but I don't find him very credible, to be perfectly honest.
I was going to say that these days some of his ideas are quite simply bat shit crazy. Okay.
Mark, he was on a few weeks ago, well, I'd say a few months ago now, and I'm kind of leaning with Don on this one.
Well, he's okay. Look, he once told me, dead right. He said to me, there are 42 civilizations living inside the sun, and I'm like, okay, whatever. I felt that was not correct. And then at a conference, I heard him say, there's a special aircraft that's being created. It's the he had a designation for it, and I said, that sounds familiar to me. And I go, I know why it's familiar. That was a PC game. It was a game on the computer. And I looked it up and found it, and he was literally quoting statistics from this fictitious plane that was created for a game on the PC.
Wow.
So,
well, let me get back to my story because
I'm with you on this. Go ahead.
He had been, and the guy, hey, when it comes to aviation, not only was he the son of William Lear of Lear Jet and Lear Sigler Corporation, his old man is a legend.
Yeah.
He was also, incidentally, by many accounts, considered bat shit crazy. But he also had a very deep, abiding interest in the UFO phenomenon. And we're talking about 50s and 60s. So anyway, John Lear had practically every certificate the FAA offers, was never in the military, but he became quite an accomplished pilot. And during the Southeast Asian War Games, and if you're from Rio Linda, I'm talking about Vietnam, okay? During the Southeast Asian War Games, Lear flew in a contracted airline for the CIA. Now, a lot of people used that against him back in the late 80s and the early 90s, but be that as it may, he served over there. And somewhere around 85 or 86, one of his buddies he had served with and knew in Southeast Asia got in touch with him and told him about the Bentwaters RAF Bentwaters base incident that happened around Christmas of 1981. Well, this basically, if you listen to what Lear will tell you, and he told me this several times, it absolutely knocked him back on his socks. So he immediately started doing a lot of research, calling people up he knew, and, you know, his family knew some real heavy hitters, all right, in the government, in the military, and what have you. And Lear started contacting a lot of these people. Well, it was, I believe, in 1987, MUFON had a big conference back in the vicinity of Washington, D.C. And Lear showed up, and he created quite a thrill because nobody really knew him then. But here was a guy who was the son of Bill Lear of Learjet, himself a very accomplished pilot, and he was showing an interest in the UFO thing. Well, MUFON saw an opportunity there. MUFON at that point was being run by the guy that started the organization by stealing membership lists and files from another organization he had been a part of, APRO, run by and owned by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. Well, they made John Lear the Nevada State Director. Now, I met Lear in very early 1988. And Lear in the late 87 time period, I think it was just before Christmas, had contacted Jim Spicer of the Paranet organization. Some of the listeners may recall that. It was basically the first ended up being an international computer database service that put UFOs on the net. Okay? And I met Jim right after Jim Spicer, right after I bought my first computer at Radio Shack, a Tandy 1000EX. And then I screwed up royally by adding a telephone modem to it. And pretty soon I was out of a ton of money, but I was having, a hell of a good time. Now, at that point, I had just gone through a divorce after I was injured. And I didn't have a lot to keep me busy. I was going to physical therapy, physical rehab. And I needed something to keep me interested. And I bought this computer. And pretty soon the tail ended up wagging this dog. And when I met Spicer online, I might add, on CompuServe, we got to be friends. And Jim put up this paper written by John Lear. Now, that was my first exposure to John Lear. And it's called the John Lear document, or the John Lear thesis. And it can still be located on the web. But I got to tell you, here was something that was shocking in its implication. Here was a guy who came from an extremely prominent family, was prominent in his own right, and he was talking about things like the U.S. government having secret treaties with an extraterrestrial intelligence that had come down to Earth, that had made agreements with secret elements within the U.S. government, including giving our government, the U.S. government, extremely advanced technology in exchange for allowing these aliens to abduct human beings for experimentation and research and mutilating animals. It was all thrown into this mix. Well, when I read it, I got to tell you, honestly, I was outraged. I was pissed off. I thought, this guy is out of his freaking mind. Well, I ended up getting his phone number and I called him up. And I got to say, he was very, very gracious to me. We talked for probably 3 hours. I was in Boise at the time. He was in Las Vegas. And the following week, I had I think it was FedEx. I had a FedEx driver come up and knock on my door. I went to the door. He handed me this package that had to weigh close to 10 pounds. And I took it in. I looked at it. It was from John Lear. And he had included practically everything he had researched up to that point, including some VHS tapes. Well, I got to say, and also there was something in there which talked about a very secret government munition, a missile that if you were to read it, Mark and Bill, you would say, oh, well, these guys are talking about knocking out underground enemy bunkers like the Iraqis or the Iranians or whoever.
Bunker
right?
busters, yeah.
Yes.
But according to Lear and his secret source, which later turned out to be Bob Lazar, these were to take out underground extraterrestrial bases. So I'm talking about right there was the Petri dish, which for the next 20 years fed God only knows how many UFO conspiracies.
I can only imagine. That was the foundation where it all began. Now, gentlemen, we are coming to a break, so we're gonna probably pick this up afterwards and continue the story of what happened in Vegas. But before we get to that, Don, was this prior to your involvement with Vicky Ecker at UFO Magazine? When did that whole begin? Because I'm wondering, were you researching for this back then for UFO Magazine at the time, or was this before that?
I was first told about Vicky and UFO Magazine, because I was totally unaware, by a gentleman by the name of Don Mason. Now, Don Mason was the MUFON state director for the state of Idaho. And I ended up contacting him. Actually, he and I became very good friends, and he appointed me as a state section director for MUFON. My one time only that I became a MUFON member for 1 year. And I'll tell you all about that when we get back from break.
All right, so we're going to be speaking.
But
go ahead. Go ahead.
Let me just say this.
You got it.
I was already working on a bunch of stuff, and I contacted UFO Magazine, who was at that time down in Los Angeles proper, LA City, at the first offices of UFO Magazine, and that's how Vicky and I initially met on the phone.
Nice. And we'll talk more about UFO Magazine and Mrs. Ecker, Vicky Ecker, who is a sweetheart. She's just a great person. I love Vicky. I love both of you, by the way. I also love my co-host for this, Marc Dantonio. And we'll be back with Don Ecker after these messages, and we'll talk more about what happened in Vegas, the STS-48, I'll say incident, because Don had a major involvement when that all broke out, and more when we come back. So stay tuned, everybody. You're listening to Dark Matters Radio right here on KGRA Radio. We'll be right back.
Reclaim your active lifestyle with Angioprim. Angioprim is the original liquid oral chelation supplement. Chelation helps remove toxins, heavy metals, and cholesterol in your veins and arteries that can cause blockages. Scientific research proves the active ingredient in Angioprim has superior oral chelation action that helps promote cardiovascular health. Find out more. Go to angioprim.com. Talk to a trained consultant by calling Angioprim toll-free 877-882-7221.
Permanent industrial glue impossible to remove? Not anymore, because Handyman Formula by D-Bond is a patented chemical adhesive remover. It's used in the building and home maintenance industry, but now it's available for your home use, for your DIY projects. Unglue stickers, silicone rubber, labels, price tags, flex tape, weather stripping, carpet glue, wood glue, liquid nails, even 3M 5200. And it dissolves graffiti. Yeah, graffiti. Handyman Formula by D-Bond works, and it's safe to use on most surfaces. No need to call a professional. Don't get out the pliers and blowtorch. Just apply a little Handyman Formula by D-Bond and wait 90 seconds, then quickly and easily pull the items apart. Get unstuck. Visit dbondhandymanformula.com. That's dbondhandymanformula.com, or call 561-575-4200. Handyman Formula by D-Bond.
The Liberator Rocket Heater will heat your home for free. The highly efficient Liberator Rocket Heater has no moving parts. It's safe and strong, constructed of 1/4-inch steel. So like all things made in the USA, it's built to last. Uses any kind of wood, sticks, even scrap in its gravity-fed firebox. And it heats workshops, homes, garages, outbuildings, industrial areas, and barns. Watch the video of this blast furnace stove in action. Visit rocketheater.com. That's rocketheater.com.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
More ways for you to make contact. Live Discord chat rooms, live talk radio, live video cast, toll-free HD phones, and coming this year, live streaming TV, giving you more ways to make contact. Your KGRAradio.com.
And welcome back to Dark Matters Radio here on the KGRA digital broadcast station. I'm here with Marc Dantonio, and yes, you are listening to Dark Matters Radio, but today, Don Ecker, which is the host of Dark Matters Radio, is the guest. Marc and I are interviewing Don. So we left off, and we were speaking about the climactic point that occurred at the MUFON conference. I believe it was in Las Vegas in 1989, Don?
Was it 87 or 89?
88.
Oh, okay.
Both are wrong.
All right, so Don, will you pick up where you left off?
Well, you bet. I was talking about John Lear, and John Lear had been appointed by Walt Andrus, who at that point was the founder and international director of MUFON. Now, they had their regular standard lineup of speakers. Hell, there's not really a lot of difference if you were to look at who was on the schedule last year. Would have been close to probably what was on the schedule for 1988 when this symposium took place. So one day, now I was going to Boise State University at the time. I was taking a series of computer science courses there. And I'm at home with my little Tandy 1000EX computer, which I got to tell you, I freaking loved that little system. Hell, I doubt that it would run my wristwatch today, okay?
Well,
but back in those days... You know, I kind of felt about that computer the same way I felt about my 914 Porsche that I bought right after I came back from the Army. I was totally in love with it. If it would have been a woman, I would have married it, okay? So anyway, I'm there working on some assignments from the computer classes, and the phone rings, so I answer it. And it was John Lear. And John said, hey, he said, you know, I'm the host of the MUFON Symposium. Well, how would you like to come down, all expenses paid, and you get a fee for speaking and talk about your mutilation research, primarily the human aspect, the human mutilations. Now, at that point, I had been up to my ears in research on the whole human mutilation thing. Actually, I got put on that by several conversations I had, one of them being John Keel, who relayed an incident to me that he had investigated where an American couple, a husband and wife, had gone down to Mexico on a mini vacation or something, and they're driving back to the border when suddenly a body fell out of the sky on the highway in front of them.
Wow.
Out of a clear sky. Now, you know, I was a cop, okay, and by nature, I have a fairly well-adjusted, well-tuned bullshit detector. All right? And I listened to that, and I wasn't quite sure. So I started asking him questions. And make a long story short, I finally came to the conclusion there might be something to this. So I started to dig. Now, when I dig, when something really piques my interest, I'm tenacious, okay? And before it was all said and done, okay, because I ran with this investigation for like 3 straight years. And I might add, I kept smashing my head into a brick wall. I did uncover more cases, but never came to any conclusion. So anyway, when Lear asked me about that, I got to tell you, I had my reservations about it because, well, I'll just say I had reservations.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
Maybe it was D.C. Cooper.
Could be. Could have been.
I was thinking, Don, and Mark, I was thinking more, maybe it was some mob job, then they threw somebody out of a plane to get rid of them or something, you know?
Yeah. I think maybe that's why they couldn't find D.C. Cooper, because that's what happened. He came out and hit the ground.
Ground beef.
So anyway, I finally decided I would do it. So I called Lear up and I said, fine. So here I am. I go out to the airport. I fly down to Vegas, get a car, go up to the hotel, and I'm walking up to the front desk, and I've got my luggage. I've got a laptop computer. I walk up to the desk. Off to my side, I see 3 guys standing there. And one is a little wee, kind of short guy. Well, I didn't know who they were. I had no idea. So I went to the desk, and the clerk or whoever came over, and I said, hi, my name is Don Ecker. I have a reservation here. And he said, oh, okay, sir, just a second. Let me check. So suddenly the little guy, the short guy, now I'm 6'2", all right? The short guy walks over to me. He's an older man, wearing glasses. I look at him. I said, hi. He said, you're Don Ecker? And suddenly I'm thinking, who the hell is this? So I said, yeah. I'm Walt Andrus. I'm the international director of MUFON. And I just want to tell you. Now, remember, I've never met this bastard before, okay? Had never talked to him, nothing. Talk about winning friends and influencing people. If you speak at John Lear's Sunday Symposium, I'm here to tell you, you'll never speak at another MUFON conference ever.
Wow.
So I look at this little pissant, and I smiled, and I said, okay, thanks. So needless to say, I spoke, and he was pretty much true to his word. I've never been invited to give a presentation at MUFON, well, National MUFON, ever. Although I have, Walt, if you're up in heaven listening, I have spoken a couple of times at the L.A. MUFON. But yeah, well, I'll tell you.
You may get a chance again there, Don.
Huh?
You may get a chance again.
I'll tell you, I figured, what a pompous, full of himself little shit this guy was. But, hey, let's face it. MUFON ain't been doing too well recently, have they? The current international director has gotten himself in some legal hot water. Now, in full disclosure, I put a post up about Jan Harzen, and the fact that he was arrested. But I reminded everybody, under American law, American jurisprudence,
Exactly.
you are considered innocent until and such time as you are proven guilty. Now, a lot of people went after him hammer and tong. And, the charges are pretty darn serious.
They're heinous, and people want to react emotionally, and mob rule
And they
cannot
do.
take the day. He must be given his day in court.
Exactly.
If he's guilty, he's either going to be exonerated or he's going to be guilty. There is no in between, but you have to let justice do its work. You have to let those wheels turn.
Amen, brother. You are right on the money. And I'll tell you, when I put that post up, I got a little hate for it.
So did I. I talked about him being innocent or not until proven guilty, and people, came out and said, well, maybe you're just like him. I was like, yeah, okay, fine. You know what? Listen to what you're saying. Mob rule can't win. I stand by it. Okay, you're innocent until proven guilty in this country. If he's guilty, I'll join you in maligning, okay? But if he's innocent, okay, I want to hear you apologize.
You know how many times I've been in court? How many times I've testified? And over the years, many, many, many times.
Yeah.
And it's a truism, okay, under American. Otherwise, what would we have? We would have mob rule, get the rope, find a tree. You've been accused of this. We're going to hang you. I mean, that can't be like that. It can't.
No, can't. That's exactly right. And we cannot let it, just because we have all this social media, it doesn't mean you have the permission to say all those things either. And that's, that'll
be one of the downfalls of Western civilization, Mark.
What, social media?
Exactly.
Well, it's world civilization, actually. You have, Western civilization, Eastern civilization. They all use social media. So it'll be the thing that changes social media, the thing that evolves social media to where it ought to be. And it can't be used as a platform to malign people. That has legal implications. That's
let's get back to this.
Yes.
Let's get back to this MUFON story.
Okay.
So I give my presentation, but before I did that, before I actually spoke, the MUFON leadership made moves to remove John Lear as the state director because he was putting on this alternative, if you will, alternative conference on Sunday. Well, they leaned on Lear, and Lear said, fine. Now, John Lear, okay, was a name to be reckoned with in Las Vegas. He went down the street to another hotel and said, I'm interested in renting out your auditorium for Sunday. I have 3 or 4 speakers that I want to bring down here. And he explained what the situation was. And the crux of it was MUFON would have lost their entire symposium because practically the entire audience would have followed Lear down the street. So finally, Andrus had to cave, okay, and Lear put on, the conference where the MUFON, put on his conference where the MUFON people were already at. But just before that had happened, William Moore,
oh yes,
okay, had been speaking, I believe it was that Friday prior to the weekend, and Moore gave a speech that still today in some quarters is talked about, where he admitted working hand in glove with American intelligence, military and intelligence people. He admitted disinforming, a scientist by the name of Paul Benowitz. The actions that the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, an operation they allegedly mounted against Paul Benowitz that caused Benowitz to have a complete breakdown where he had to be institutionalized in a mental facility for a while. And Bill Moore admitted the whole damn thing.
Wow.
Now, when that happened, now Bill Moore was at that point a huge, very big name in UFO research. His book, the first book that came out about Roswell, was Bill Moore's book. And I forget now exactly what it's called, the Roswell Crash, I think. But it was the whole story at that point about the UFO that came down in Roswell in 1947. And Moore was, at that point, also a member of APRO under Jim and Coral Lorenzen. And it has been suggested very strongly that after he was approached by these sources from military and intelligence, Moore was also telling his handlers, his military intelligence handlers, about what operations people like APRO was carrying on. Kind of like in 1992, when I broke the STS-48 video series, the Space Shuttle incident, I was surveilled by, among other people, a naval optical physicist, Bruce Maccabee. The day that I received the videotape from a gentleman back on the East Coast, Mr. Don Ratch, that's another whole story. As a matter of fact, I just reached out to Don Ratch. Hopefully I'm going to hear from him very soon. I'd love to bring him on this program and just kick this entire thing around. But the day I received in the mail this video, all right, I get a call from Bruce Maccabee. Now, this is in California, right? Maccabee was living in Maryland. He was allegedly out here on a scientific symposium of some type. He was still working as an optical physicist for the Navy. And he just kind of wanted to drop by and say hi to Vicki and I. Well, I've talked about that here before. And I confronted Maccabee on this very show a year or two ago when I brought him on to talk about that. And he conveniently couldn't remember anything, which is the way spooks try to get around things. But be that as it may, Bill, you may recall that.
Yes.
So, we've always had suspicions that various people within the research arena, depending upon what they were involved in, were being surveilled. Now, and I gotta say up front that some of this is speculation, what I'm about to relate next, but it's very informed speculation, going along with a lot of my own observations at the time. In 1994, at UFO Magazine. Now, at that point in time, I had already started my very first radio show, UFOs Tonight, which was carried weekly on CRN, the cable radio network. Now, I had hit really all the cutting edge people in the field at that time, including many others, from U.S. congressmen to people like Robert Wise, Academy Award-winning film directors. I just hit all around the dial, and my show was very well received. It went from coast to coast. It went to Alaska. It went to Hawaii. And incidentally, I might add, this is going to sound like I'm polishing my own apple, and I guess I am, but I was doing UFO radio before Art Bell was. When I started in 91, Art was still doing political talk on satellite. So for whatever that's worth. So I get a call from the Disney Corporation, and they're telling me that down in Orlando, Florida, at their resort, they have a brand new attraction that they're building called the Extraterrestrial attraction, where the audience would go into this building, and it's supposedly some kind of scientific exercise, and I don't know whether it was wormholes or interdimensional travel or something. Now remember, this is an attraction, no different than riding the teacup, but you would walk through it, and suddenly evil aliens beam in. Now, they said, this is going to last, what we want you to do, we want you to host this symposium we're going to put on, and you pick the people you want or you think are the top UFO researchers in the United States at that time. You'll have one group come in week one group come in week 2. You'll be the host, and we'll pay for all your airfare. We'll put you up, room and board. Incidentally, they did not pay me. Now, I had a business manager, and she was very high-powered. I met her through my buddy Dwight Schultz of the A-Team television show Star Trek: The Next Generation and Voyager, where he played Lieutenant Barclay. Had a very deep fascination in the UFO arena. And Lynn, her name was Lynn Russo. Lynn agreed to represent me. And she recommended I do this because this might lead to other things down the road that would be lucrative. Now, in full disclosure, it never did. And in a big way, I'm sorry I did it, but I agreed. And I contacted and brought in the cream of the cream in the UFO field. As a matter of fact, if I would have put on a symposium like that, if I would have had the wherewithal to do it myself, we would have had, and it had, of course, enough lead time, we could have had literally thousands of attendees show up. Because the people that I had there, I brought in George Knapp. I brought in Zachariah Sitchin. I brought in Don Schmidt. I brought in Kevin Randall. I brought in Jesse Marcel, Dr. Jesse Marcel. I brought in Mr. Tour Darlene. I brought in Vicky. I brought in television producer Russ Estes. I just had a whole lineup. Well, we got down there, and the first group came in. Everybody was very happy with their rooms and the food, etc. But the first day of this symposium, we had maybe 2 people in the audience. Now, the fact of the matter is, this auditorium could have held hundreds of people, hundreds. As it turned out, on neither week 1 nor week 2, Disney did not do 1 second of promotion.
Wow.
The fact of the matter was, we had the creme de la creme of the entire UFO field in one spot, and literally nobody saw it.
But Don, let me just stop you there.
Highest attended day.
Go ahead.
We might have had 12 people in there.
Wow. But let me ask you, when you agreed to do this, did Disney inform you to tell you that they were going to promote this and make this a big event? I mean, how did that happen?
Bill,
or
it
were they
was
pressured?
freaking Disney.
I know, but still.
It was freaking Disney. If there's anybody that's savvy in this field, it would be them. Now, I put on my cop hat after this was all over. Listen to my thinking on this. What was happening in 1995 computer-wise? Did we have an internet even somewhat comparable to what we have today?
It was just
Hell
pretty
no.
much. Yeah, it was just starting up. I remember Windows 95. Yeah, I remember that.
Dial.
Hell no. We had nothing.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you were a spook at the CIA or the NSA or the NRO or the AFOSI, how in the hell would you really get a handle on what these nut jobs in the UFO field were doing? You couldn't. Hell, we had Vicky and I at UFO Magazine. We had about 10 or 12 subscriptions, month in, month out, that went to the Pentagon. Okay. That was one way, but how much can you put in a monthly or bi-monthly magazine? Very little, right? Well, it finally became clear to me that they wanted, for whatever reason that was going on in 1995, they wanted to have a handle on what was the current flavor of the week in UFOs. Now, what was happening with UFOs then? Well, the Roswell anniversary was coming up, wasn't it? People were also talking about what? The face on Mars and ancient civilizations. People like Zecharia Sitchin in Genesis Revisited were talking about ancient space bases possibly being reactivated on Mars or the moon. People were talking about who? Bob Lazar.
Yes, but they also were talking about you with what you had done with the STS-48 thing too. You're part of that equation too, because that whole thing with the Phobos.
Oh, sure.
You know,
sure.
So there was actually a lot going on, like you're indicating. But still, it sounds like either they were pressured by the government not to promote it.
It was, no. I am convinced, look, to begin with, that had to cost somebody a pretty penny. All those plane tickets, all those reservations at their Disney resort, all those meals that they were doing. We got free passes to any rides or anything we wanted to go to on our day off.
So it was a setup to get you all there on location to see what you guys would say.
Exactly. Then they brought in Robert Ulrich. Remember that guy,
Yes.
Spencer for Hire? Okay, and a lot of other stuff. To do a special Disney TV UFO special that was initially, who did they bring on at the beginning of that? Michael Eisner, who was El Supremo head honcho of Disney at the time, to introduce this. And then when did they run it? It was never, this TV show was never aired in prime time or anything. They would run it ad hoc, like maybe on a Tuesday afternoon at 3 p.m., maybe on a Thursday, night wee hours of the morning at 2 a.m., and then they shelved it. It made no freaking sense at all. None. Unless somebody at CIA, NSA, NRO, AFOSI wanted to know what the hell was going on. And this was a way to get everybody in there. They brought in their spooks to take copious notes, and it was an intelligence put up from top to bottom.
Wow. That's incredible. But it's not, I mean, I've heard stories I don't know if Marc does a lot of these conferences. I don't know if Marc would want to comment on this, but I hear a lot of people saying that they notice in these conferences from time to time, these big conferences, that they notice that there might be some element in the audience that may be government officials or affiliated.
Of course there is.
So I hear this too. Marc, what is your take on that?
Well, I'm still here anyway. I don't actually see any evidence of that typically. If they're there, they certainly don't want you to know they're there, and They're not going to draw attention. They're not going to stand around in black suits and dark glasses and have their arms at their sides and just stare into the crowd hoping to blend in, because they certainly wouldn't. They would be looking like anybody else. They wouldn't be in any uniforms or they'll just look like regular people. And there's no way of knowing. There's absolutely no way of knowing, and they're not going to telegraph that. I mean, they really are quite good at their job. So I expect that you won't know. What I think is you have to try and get to the truth regardless. And honestly, the truth can't be held down forever. It has to come out eventually. And, I think we're being visited. Okay, that's me. It's based on scientific evidence and statistics. It's not based on, because I want to believe. It's based on the fact that I find that it's impossible for them not to be here. In fact, it'd be a miracle if they're not here. I think Seth Shostak actually said that. It'd be hard to believe that, there's that they're here, but it'd be a miracle if they didn't exist at all. So I think that they are probably here. That's my feeling.
But
that's the aliens. But as far as the guys in black, human people trying to find out what we know. Well, the bottom line is these conferences are the best things for their agenda. Yep. If you want to hide a black project, well, then you can be sure to call it a UFO or make it seem like it's a UFO, and then it'll always be fringe news. It will never be mainstream. I worked on a very case like that where they utilized. I was actually part of this Navy project as a contractor, where they actually used that very thing to shield the project from the public's eyes, but it backfired. And there was a aerial vehicle that was created that I was making engineering models of for the Navy. We called it the Birdie, and it's actually a public project now. It's known as Project Cormorant. You can look it up online. And when you look it up, it says canceled, and I have to snicker at that, which I can explain. But Project Cormorant was designed to be a vehicle that would leave a submarine missile tube, come to the surface, unfold its wings, take off like an aircraft, go fly a mission, come back into the water, land in the water, fold up its wings, and go back and put itself down in the missile tube. Missile tube closes, it goes home. Submarine's never exposed, crew's never exposed, no danger whatsoever. Just this unit heads out and does its thing. Well, it's sort of like the flying sub from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, that 1960s series. It starred Richard Basehart, as Admiral Nelson. Remember? It was a great show. Well, the flying sub, in effect, did exist, and so they were testing it at a lake in Bayview, Idaho, called Lake Pend Oreille. And it's a known Navy base out there, and they do sonar testing there. It's a well-known. You can walk into a visitor center and see a model I made of this whole structure. And the people in the Navy were testing this craft there. It would take off from the water, fly around, and somebody saw it and started taking photographs of it. And the photographs made their way to me. Because of MUFON. And I called the program office and said, hey, there's people taking pictures of the Birdie. And they said, well, what do they think it is? And I said, well, it's being pushed as like a UFO or so. And I said, what should I tell them? He goes, tell them nothing. Let them think it's a UFO. And my response was, well, let me show you how that'll go in my eyes, knowing this group, these people, these types of people. One photographer today will get 2 tomorrow and 6 the next day and 12 the next day. Eventually, someone is going to catch the Birdie doing something that you don't want them to see. So if you want this thing to stay on the QT until you get the bugs worked out of it, it's not going to happen, and someone's going to expose it, And so this was me now taking and putting my MUFON business first, and my Navy work second. All right, I was taking a side, and I was siding with the people that are investigating UFOs here. And the guy said to me, "All right, I'll give you a statement." And it was 2 days later, I got a typed statement saying that this was one of ours that was being tested. So I made that known out there and to the folks through media out there. And the next day, they didn't have any photographers taking pictures of it. They went away. I said they'd go home if they think it's one of ours, and they went home. They knew it wasn't a UFO, and that's what they were after. See, so there's times when it backfires on the folks that try to use the UFO as a shield for their project work. And as long as they know that's going to keep happening, then I think they'll be less likely to keep doing it. But that's what happened to me.
Well, since we're talking about something that you just brought up, I'm going to just put this into a different direction for a second. I want both of your opinions on this. On this whole, the TTSA release, when this whole happened, and I think it was in 19 or 17, Mark, you might know, when Leslie Kane wrote the article for the New York Times with the Tic Tac. I'm thinking to myself, okay, what a perfect scenario that this can be a test platform for something that we're developing. Right away, it's a UFO, it's alien origin. A lot of people are jumping out, saying that it's something like that. But similar to what you just said, it's a perfect cover. Let them say it's a UFO. Let them talk about that because it's covered.
And Don, I'm sure you're aware of this. I actually brought up on our show on SkyTour Radio and on SkyTour live stream and in public at a conference. I actually stated too that, well, if you think about it, okay, it is a perfect cover. However, you also have to look at the fact that yes, this could be extraterrestrial in nature, maybe. Okay, but why leap to that conclusion before you fully investigate everything else? In looking at everything else, I also found, as others did, that the Navy just a couple of years ago was granted patents on a hypersonic vehicle that runs underwater or in the air. So that means they were granted patents on a vehicle that, of course, has to be tested at some point, that can go faster than anything known underwater and faster than anything known out in the air. So if this was something in existence, that would be the black project that people would say, hey, let's unleash this on our air crews.
In your mind, Mark, that time you were on board that submersible ship, that submarine.
Yes.
And you were present when the sonar technician or radar guy, sonar detected the underwater submersed unknown object. Would that explain it? American technology or somebody else's?
And at the time, I felt, what the beep was this thing? I really did. See, Bill, you don't even have to bleep me. I did it myself. What the heck was this thing that we just saw? I mean, the kid, I didn't see it because I can't read the waterfall display that he's looking at. And he told the executive officer that it was moving several hundred knots after giving him a bearing and range, which I couldn't hear because he was facing away from me. But he was sort of incredulous when he said several hundred knots, sir, when he was asked how fast it was going. And the XO didn't look at him like, wow, or anything like that. He just looked at him and just matter-of-factly said, okay, log it and dog it. And the kid said, sir, yes, sir. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. The XO walked away, and I got up. I was like, hey, I'm not letting this sit. And that's when I went to the XO and told him, hey, I know something about this. Can I help? And he said to me, you having a good trip, sir? I go, yes, I am. He says, let's keep it that way. And he walked away. It's like, okay, I'm small. I will just go hide over here behind this little console and just pretend I'm not seasick. I would have been seasick. That's why I sat there. Well, anyway, that whole incident, something moving several hundred knots underwater, is definitely a hypersonic vehicle at the least, and but it was ultra quiet. The only other nearest contender is the Russian rocket torpedo called the Skval, and that's a desperation weapon. You fire that, and it's the loudest thing in the ocean because it will just blow out all sonars. It's basically generating a gigantic, and read that as noisy, laminar layer of steam through which this thing is traveling. So that explains why it can go so fast. The water is effectively displaced. Well, it's loud, and this signal was there and it was gone. And I had since found out that other submariners had seen this type of thing as well, and each boat had different names for them. I don't know if it was all the same. This boat, they called them fast movers. On another boat, they call them jellyfish. Okay, and that's because they didn't know what else to call them. So they have to classify them as something. So they call them jellyfish, which is ironic because last time I knew, jellyfish don't really make any kind of auditory noise. But still, they had to classify them as something. So they end up in the biologic category, which makes no sense. So anyway, and Don, you know this, I had to do a job for the Joint Chiefs a few years later. And I asked one of the chiefs directly, what can you tell me about the Fast Mover program? And I was really pushing friendship by saying that, because I had all the access for doing this Navy work at the time, and he basically could have said, as I've told you, I don't know what you're talking about. What's that? Or anything. But instead, he says, I can't talk about the program. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me pop in here since I'm the guest tonight.
Go for it.
let me pop in here and tell you from my own experience. When I was active duty Army, I was involved in intelligence operations in Southeast Asia. I had a top security clearance. I had a crypto access, which was as high as you could go in my field. I looked at a lot of this stuff, and this unidentified program that's currently on with To the Stars Academy.
Yep.
Now, for decades, I've been involved in this field, and for decades, I have butted heads with everybody you can imagine in government, in NASA, the skeptical community, morons in the UFO field, you name it, okay? And I can show you every lump from the headbutting I did. And I've looked at this show, Unidentified, and one of the participants is Christopher Mellon, a former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. That's pretty rarefied up in the stratosphere, that guy. And suddenly, after decades of looking at how the government has pushed back and said there's nothing there, it's all mistakes, it's delusions, it's, people pie in the sky, it's natural phenomena, there are no such thing as unidentified. Well, we know that's crap, okay? We know. And suddenly, here is a guy that was a part of that community here doing UFO investigation in a public arena. Now, I've thought about that long and hard since this program first made the airwaves, okay, in season 1. I did my research on all those guys, everything that was available about them on the net. I have tried and have been rebuffed to contact any of those people that would be willing to come on this show so we could kick this around. And the bottom line is, I came to the conclusion one of just a couple of things would explain why Christopher Mellon is here. Number one, he saw something that scared the bejesus out of him. Maybe he talked to some of his intelligence buddies, and they gave him the go-ahead to go out there and do a soft disclosure. That's one possibility. The next possibility Maybe he is working on a covert, secret, way in the back black box intelligence operation for whatever reason to massage this. Okay? And, of course, there's always the possibility that he's getting a nice paycheck, and I kind of doubt that. He's certainly getting paid, but how much, I have no idea. And he's simply doing it for the money. And I know how these networks, these production companies like Prometheus, I know how they work. I've been on enough of them over the years where they'll come in and try to get me to say this or say that. And incidentally, I always refuse. But maybe that's why I haven't been invited recently. But you know, there's that possibility. Now, Mark, what do you think? You've certainly been on the raceway. I see your mug all over the TV. Bill, and what do you think about it?
Mark?
Well, first of all, I know that these shows certainly are trying to entice people to watch. That's how they make their profits, their monies, right? They get people to watch their shows. But let's be honest, they are covering a topic that people do want to talk about. And my experience in the field is that I'm never told what to say. I'm asked what I think, and my words are never twisted. My words are never changed. They always put what I say on the air. So I actually have to say, from another point of view, from my point of view, I have respect for these production companies I've worked for thus far, because they have never changed anything I've said. They've always done the right thing by me. I don't know how they treat other people. I just know that, I hear people say, well, they twisted and they edit. No, never. I was wary of that at the beginning, but they've never done that. Even when I give them information that they don't want to hear, like, no, that's not a UFO. That's actually 3 pennies on a piece of glass photographed from underneath. And by the way, I can prove it, and things like that. And then they're okay. I mean, they just want to get to the truth, in my view. So I've never had a bad experience with production companies. I'm not trying to protect them. I mean, I don't care about that. I wouldn't do it. My integrity matters too much to me to sell out to anybody. I'll never do that. I want to just get to the answer. I want to do the right thing by people, because in my view, if I were to participate in a show that plays that type of game, okay, I would be doing a disservice to anyone who watches or listens to me after that. So as long as they don't change my words, and as long as they don't, try to make me say something that's not true or trick me into it, which they've never done, then I would have then I don't have a problem. So I think that maybe, I don't know, Don, maybe you're too much of a cop. You're trying, and they don't want to. You're too wary or something. I don't know. Maybe, and your suspicions are founded, I'm sure, depending on who you're talking to.
Plus, Don is the type of person that he's not going to accept BS. He's going to confront, be blunt, and direct. He's not going to throw the softballs, so they're going to have to be prepared to be confronted about a lot of the questions that I think people want to ask of them. Yeah. Because a lot of people are coming up. Currently we live in the state where everything's a conspiracy, deep state. There's some agenda. Everything's agenda driven. So what's their angle? Are they a bunch of spooks, disinfo folks? What is the purpose? Are they looking for government contracts to do some work for the for the research money? What is it?
Well, here's one for you. And being that Don's the guest, I guess we got to let him talk too, right?
Yes.
But here's something for you. What if it's the disinfo folks that are creating these controversies to begin with, and that were never there, or maybe if they were, and thus the existence, for instance, of the chemtrail conspiracy is due to the people who are making the claims, and they're actually building it up as if it's really there, but it's not there at all. Yeah, I don't believe.
Yeah, well, the chemtrail thing could be connected to climate people.
Even more so than chemtrails. What I would love to know, the real story behind?
What's that?
Tell me.
Black-eyed kids.
Mm.
Ooh, yeah, I've heard about that one too. Actually, I've seen that. I read an article about the black-eyed children, and again, being a science guy, as everybody knows, I'm a science guy. I'm a nerd. I'm a geek. The truth is, anyone can look like they have black eyes if photographed the right way. So I want to know what the conditions were under which they saw these black-eyed kids. You know what I mean?
Well, I've read a number of accounts. Several years ago, I was really into this. I had somebody on DMR that we were kicking that around. Bill, I got to tell you anymore, I don't recall who it was, but I did a lot of research on that, and there was definitely something that was projected from these so-called BEKs, black-eyed kids, that terrorized the people they approached. Do you recall that interview?
Yes. Also, I've also heard the work of, I think it's David Weatherly. I think he focuses on the black-eyed children, and he mentions a lot of the same type of material as well. But before, we only got like 7 minutes left of this show. First, before...
Like we do. We're going to go as long as we darn well please.
First, I want to say happy third anniversary to Don Ecker. This is his third year on KGRA, and I, as his producer, am humbled, honored to be working with him as his producer. I consider him a dear friend, and I look at him as a father figure. That's first of all. And
wow.
Yes.
That's nice.
And I hope that we do many more of these shows down in the future. But before we wrap, because Marc has mentioned this in the past from a scientific perspective, and getting back to this whole phenomenon about what people are seeing and reporting and tic-tacs and everything else. I've spoken to some of the folks that are your buddies, Don, including Dr. Brandenburg, who told me about somebody that he was aware of overseas, a Russian scientist. But basically, I've spoken to other people off the record, too. And the consensus is that we're dealing with a propulsion system that's being tested, whether it's electromagnetic, plasma, but this is something that's creating, and Marc, why I reference is Alcubierre drive, that it's creating some type of a bubble, a field around it that doesn't look like it has any surface. It's just like an oval or round, which would explain the tic-tac shape. And that's what people are seeing, the experimentation platform of these up in the air or wherever they're going, whatever they're putting these up there. But that it's actually a propulsion that is creating this field, bubble. And that's what people are seeing. And there's maybe a craft in the inside of that bubble.
Maybe so, and we can't, as science folks, we can't just dismiss things out of hand. We just can't.
Obviously unoccupied craft, right?
Right.
Well, not so
Drones,
obvious. I mean, because
well, then you'd have to worry about the inertial forces.
Well, actually, you don't. It depends on what propulsion technique you use. If we're talking about what Bill said, the Alcubierre drive, you have a whole spacecraft in the middle of this bubble, and the spacecraft can get to Alpha Centauri in about 5 days. Now, that means an extreme amount of acceleration, yet you don't feel it inside this warp bubble. And the reason is, and I have to say it this way, you're actually pulling the universe past you as fast as you can while you're sitting still. That's effectively what this is doing. So
that's all theoretical at this point, though, Marc, right?
Well, yes. Again, yes and no. And the reason has to do with the requirements for the energy to create the warp bubble. NASA's actually funded a lab to explore this. And I got something else to say about the whole tic-tac thing, too. NASA's funding a lab to actually look at getting a working Alcubierre prototype eventually. Now, we're probably 100 years from this because we have to harness the energy. But the amount of energy required used to be the amount equivalent to converting the planet Jupiter, the biggest planet in our solar system, to energy. Okay, that's a huge amount, all right? And if you look at Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, well, the m is Jupiter's mass, c is the speed of light, which is huge, and the energy is gigantic as a result. So that means take Jupiter and convert it to energy. That's what roughly what you need to make this warp bubble, to make one jump. Well, now that amount of mass that is required has, thanks to Dr. Sonny White at the EagleWorks Laboratories, a NASA-funded lab, by reworking the geometry of how that Alcubierre drive works, he's reduced that amount of energy required from the mass of Jupiter to like the mass of the Voyager spacecraft. And at that point, it's become distantly plausible. See, so it's plausible. We certainly can't do it yet, but it's definitely something we see in our future, okay?
Okay, now before we totally run out of time, yes. I got something I want to bounce off both you guys. Right. Allegedly, I haven't read it, but I've seen it referenced from a number of people. There were allegations that somebody was talking about the Pentagon having their hands on craft or objects that came from an off-world source. Are you both familiar with that?
Yes.
I may have held that material in my hands.
Yep, I remember Mark telling me about that. And we also know Linda Moulton Howe may have been in the possession of arts parts, which supposedly was something of unknown origin. It wasn't of this earth, supposedly. Yeah,
and I know that...
well, then you get down the chain of evidence. The chain of evidence would dictate you've got to know the provenance of where that stuff came from.
Exactly.
And I got to tell you, the stuff, and I remember this story when it broke, the provenance of arts parts, I'm highly skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The stuff looks like ordinary stuff, but you're being told that it's something else. And when we got it, we were also shown the MIT laboratory result reports for this material. Now, is it the material we were holding in our hands? And why, if it was this material, were we allowed to hold it with our hands? Shouldn't it have been in like a clear, climate-controlled box or something?
Exactly.
And so, I was concerned about that.
Absolutely.
So I was concerned about that. Even the moon rocks are in a climate-controlled environment, to keep contamination out. So I didn't know what the story was, with that. And I hold out hope that maybe this is the real stuff. I don't know. But the people that brought it to us were also doing a documentary that Doug Trumbull and I took part in. And we did this up at Doug's studio, So
you remember that circus a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago, with Steve Greer and the alien mummy, the fetus, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical examiner, but I have been involved in homicide cases. I've witnessed, I've been to autopsies, and here were these clowns handling this alleged alien mummy with bare hands.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me a freaking break.
Well,
I noticed.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, guys. And
stop. Keep going.
I know. I wish we could. We got another show to do after this. But anyway, thank you, Marc Dantonio, for being here tonight with myself to interview our good friend Don Ecker. And next week, Don Ecker will have Jim Peniston as his guest here on Dark Matters Radio, Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure you're here for the show. Anyway, for Don Ecker, Marc Dantonio, and myself, thank you for listening, everyone, tonight to Dark Matters Radio. And we'll be back next week. So until next time, have a great night, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Keep your eyes pointed up, your ear to the ground, just to know what's going on, and we'll see you then.
Good night, everybody.
All right.